Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending January 14th. We're officially into the second week of January. Still in Mercury retrograde, which is, well, it is what it is. We just all have to deal with it, right? It's really all we can do. Let's go ahead and get things rolling. We're going to start, as we always do, with Aries. Continue to have Jupiter in Aries. We will for a few months, to be honest with you. And continue to be focused on that secret closet. This is really not a great place to be focused on at the beginning of the year, and at the same time it kind of is. And like to start off the year with a clean slate, and was just actually talking to a client this morning about how she takes this week to go through things and donate them to the Salvation Army or what have you. So she's cleaning out things that she no longer uses in order to make room for new things that may be coming into her life. And so we do that with our things, but we have to do that with our emotional trauma as well. And that's really what Focus on the Secret Closet is all about. That is going to intensify a little bit as we get into Friday, when the moon moves into opposition with Jupiter and squares with that retrograde Mercury. So we're actually looking at a T-square, which is a pretty big challenge. That's going to last on Friday basically, and that's it. So it's really only influencing one day, which is good. But that being said, because the moon is involved in this and it is in opposition, we're looking at maybe issues within your day-to-day schedule, mix-ups, people rescheduling you at the last minute, which could possibly be triggering some past trauma in some way. And you wouldn't think that those two things necessarily go together, but they do. Past trauma influences just about everything that happens in your life. And if you're already in a bad mood, then these little inconveniences are going to play into that and quite possibly make things more difficult than they need to be. So it is very important to just be aware that that is a thing and something that could be happening. In my view, the more aware I am, the more I am prepared for Mercury retrograde BS, for lack of a better word, the easier it is for me to get through. It doesn't mean that I don't have those days where it's just like so overwhelming that it's really hard to keep my cool. But if I can keep my cool for 9 out of 10 days, that does make it easier on me, my mood, my mental, emotional, physical health in the long run. So it's worth a shot, right? Try and let it like water off a duck's back as much as you can. Let go of the little things, work a little bit more towards the bigger things, and just keep on keeping on basically. And things will go okay. A little bit of a rocky start. We will be out of this focus on the secret closet soon enough, and then we'll be focused on something else. So my advice is always, trauma never comes up at a good time, a time that's convenient for anybody. It usually comes up in the middle of something that we just don't have time to deal with trauma at the time, while we're dealing with other things. But when you do have time, it's a benefit to me to take some time to understand why that was traumatic for me, to understand where the root comes from, and to just sort of, walk myself through. This is not the same thing as that. That is totally different. This is totally different. Let's focus on this as an adult and see if we can't comfort the inner child in the meantime. And that sort of just helps you to kind of identify trauma that's still stuck in there, release it, move on, with things being a little bit lighter. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And I'm going to move on to Taurus. Well, the good news is we continue to not have that square with Saturn. The bad news is Venus just moved right on in behind Saturn, creating that square again, which will start pretty early on in the week, actually, by Monday. Venus moves into that position. Now, the good news about this is it's not going to last anywhere near as long as the last one did. Venus moves pretty quickly. I mean, we're at 8 degrees at the beginning of the week and we're at 14 by the end. So this will probably be over by next week, but it is going to inconvenience things this week. And we totally need another inconvenience when we have Mercury retrograde currently right now, which, by the way, is not so much of an inconvenience for you guys as Uranus moves into a trine with Mercury. That Mercury retrograde actually can work in your favor. Now, most of us look at Mercury retrograde as a bad thing, but a lot of really good things do happen during Mercury retrogrades. And because Mercury is in Earth signs this year, again, influencing Earth signs, it may actually be helpful to you to slow things down enough to make sure that you're not missing steps in terms of your long-term goals, and specifically your steps revolving around you and self-care and making sure that you are taking care of your needs as well as everybody else's while you're out there. When we get to the end of the week on Friday, the moon moving into wait a minute, not Friday. I'm so sorry about that. We're not talking Friday. We are talking Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right in the middle of the week. The moon moves into Virgo, and this creates a grand trine. Now, this is 3 planets in the same element, all working together in order to help you through certain situations. And the moon's focus is very much on those you love, and Mercury's focus is on your long-term goals. Now, Mercury's retrograde slows down planning on long-term goals, but that may be a good thing. Most of the Tauruses that I know, they're either one or the other. They're really slow to progress and move along, which is fine as long as you're getting there, or they're doing so many different things at once that they're actually speeding through the process. And that speeding through the process, you wind up missing things, you wind up forgetting things, you wind up making mistakes that you may not have time to fix later on. And so actually slowing down your long-term goal process, though frustrating, is actually helpful because you may actually be identifying things that you didn't realize were things that you should be paying attention to. So that's really important. It does feel a little bit like here we are starting off the year and things are slow moving. And I get that we don't want to feel that way at all. But in my experience, as annoying as it is, sometimes it really is for my own good. And I will admit that, of course, later, but in the moment, I'm like, I don't want to get through this. You know, we all do it. You can prevent yourself from doing it if you so choose to. And that will make things a little bit easier for you. Also, Uranus and the moon are in a grand trine with the sun, which is focused on career. So we're also looking at long-term career goals. And that adds another layer to things. If you are working on your career goals and you're working on other goals that you have in mind as well, you could be overworking yourself just a little bit. It always bounces back to the self-care, right? It always does. I have a couple of Taurus clients that I talk to all the time about, and I always ask, are you remembering your self-care? Yes. Well, yeah, you know, yes, they are, but not as they should. Hence, they keep getting worn out over and over and over again. I actually had a Taurus client who wrote a book in a weekend. She just spent the whole weekend writing this book. But this is a woman who would go and go and go and go and go and then wind up in the hospital. Like every time. That's not something that you want to do. And that's what self-care tries to avoid, is that all of a sudden you just can't go anymore kind of a feeling. And when you get to that point, especially if it's as drastic as winding up in the hospital over and over again, you're not doing it right. You have to make sure that you are taking care of number one first. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Gemini, Mars moves direct on Friday. Actually, Friday is a big day for you guys in multiple different ways, but we do continue to have Mars in Gemini, and Mars moves out of that retrograde on Friday, which means forward movement, which means he can finally get out of there. And actually, I've been noticing for a lot of Geminis, this Mars retrograde has really been having a lot of Geminis just feeling wiped out. Which Mars energy in that way definitely would feel that way. A lot of Geminis have also been feeling, trying to move forward, but they just can't. It's kind of like being stuck in quicksand. You can't even get one step forward, you get two steps back, kind of a thing, which is another thing that Mars retrograde is really famous for. So to have that forward movement again, to have your energy back, can't say focus, but at least to have your energy back, that does make things a lot easier, especially with your focus being on the past this week. And Mars influencing that focus on the past is kind of interesting. Usually we don't think about focus on the past as something that will move us forward or promote us moving forward in some way, but it does kind of help. I mean, part of learning from your mistakes is revisiting them to make sure that that doesn't happen again, kind of a thing. And I feel like a lot of Geminis do have this problem because it's all about their intellect and whatever ideas their brains are promoting to move them forward. And unfortunately, our brains get stuck in a loop all the time. And if we're not identifying that this is a loop or a problem, we're not resolving the problem also. And so I feel like that direct motion with Mars moving forward towards the end of the week is going to help with that. It's just going to feel like things are dragging, then boom, it's like somebody shot you out of a cannon, and there you go. And it's just idea after idea, which is awesome. The moon moving into Libra at the end of the week also is helpful, as Mars is in a trine with Pluto. I'm sorry, no, Mars is in a trine with Venus, which is in Aquarius right now. And the moon moving into Libra is going to make that a big trine, of what we call a grand trine. That's three planets working together for you. The moon's focus will be on your day-to-day schedule, and Venus's focus is on career. So I see this as sort of opening up opportunities, possible new career opportunities, which if career has felt stagnant over the last few weeks, that is also going to be really helpful. You won't feel quite as stuck in this place where that feels like a hamster wheel as well. So that's good. It's really helpful energy towards making that change, if that is something that you're looking at right now. Also with Venus ruling career right now, and that sort of creative energy is interesting. Geminis are very creative people. As intellectual as they are, they come up with these brilliantly creative ideas. And I feel like a lot of this has to do with those Geminis out there that just have been doing the same thing career-wise for so long. This is an opportunity to step out of that box and get a little creative with what you're doing. Get into something that's going to feel like it's promoting more creativity than just sucking you dry energetically, if that makes sense. So there's really a whole lot of wonderful energy going in that direction for you guys this week, which is nice. You definitely want to jump on and use that as much as possible to promote yourself forward and get yourself out of a situation. No Gemini likes to be stuck in anything. And if that is the case, you want to look for something where you can use your talents. And we all know that you have many talents. You want to be able to use as many of those talents as possible and get a little creative. Take things out of the box a little bit. Everybody has to do that every now and then, but I think Geminis, they just move so quickly from one thing to another that they get bored easily. So they have to be able to get creative in what they're doing. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to Cancer. We continue to be focused on the home with Cancer, although there is a bit of an element of focus on the mind and how you think as well, which is actually interesting. I'm not a Cancer. I have a Cancer rising, but my house is my favorite place and I love it. And any excuse for me to stay there all day in my pajamas, I will jump on that and take that in a heartbeat. But too much time can be depressing as well. And I really feel that with the influence of Palestine and how you think and the focus being on home, this really is all about making sure that you're creating the environment that you think it is, if that makes sense. I feel like as human beings, we have a lot of expectations, and some of those expectations we have control over and some of them don't. For cancers in particular, cancers do have a lot of expectations for other people. They expect to be treated the way they are treating other people. And that doesn't always happen in this world, unfortunately. Hell, it doesn't even happen most of the time within families. So this creates a very depressing, very angry situation for a Cancer. And your environment should be the safe place away from that, not necessarily a place that's going to be a constant reminder of everything you don't have, if that makes sense. So I feel like this week it's important to focus on your environment, yes, but this is all about your mental health and how you view things as well. And if you're viewing things in a negative way, it's always going to promote a negative response. The more you focus on things in a positive way, it doesn't necessarily, it's not a magic pill that's going to change everything positive, but it will help you to see the good in the situation more often than the bad. And that's really what it comes down to. If we're wired to look at the bad all the time, of course, that's the first thing that we're going to see. My husband and I actually argue about this all the time. He sees the good in people most of the time, right off the bat. He's looking for the good in people, and he finds it. He finds it every time. My justification for always seeing the bad in people is I want to know what I'm dealing with before I even think about looking at the good. And while that is not a bad thing, it's also not healthy for me in terms of building relationships, because obviously the first thing that you see is bad, you're not going to pursue a relationship with that person. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Leo, we're just going to go ahead and kick off the week with the moon in your sign, moving into opposition with first Venus on Sunday and then Saturn on Monday. Also moving into a square with Uranus, and if there's a T-square, it's a couple of hours. So we're like, basically, we're dodging that bullet, which is good because it's a much bigger challenge here. But hopefully that happens when everybody's asleep. And it's just not a challenge, we'll put it that way. Focus is on those that you love, and with the moon in opposition with Venus and with Saturn, both of those planets are focused on career goals and those that support you, and specifically your career support, or it seems to stem around your career support, if that makes sense. Being right at the beginning of the week, it really does. Uranus's focus is on self, and the moon in a square with Uranus, which is retrograde. Uranus is also called Uranus, but Uranus is so much more fun to say. Uranus is Aquarius's planet. It's all about being out of the box. It's all about doing things differently. When you have what's called an age of Aquarius, the entire world changes. The Industrial Revolution happens, the technological revolution happens, or the pandemic happens, because we were in an age of Aquarius during that too. Whatever it is, it promotes drastic changes socially and how we live, and the structure of everything is different. And we've just seen that here in the last few years. But the point is, Uranus retrograde tends to look more to traditional ways of doing things tried and true ways is what I call them. With focus on self, a lot of this does have to do with self-care. It does have to do with self-promotion. It does have to do with self-healing as well. But it is really pointed at you and your control, and what responsibilities are you taking to make sure that these things are set up. And so if we're talking about career support or your support system at work, we're looking specifically at, and of course the moon being involved, it's going to be an emotional issue, but we're looking specifically at these things that take place that showcase where we are lacking in support. And when you are lacking in support in your career, this is a very tough place to lack support in, especially if we're talking about not having support, the support that you're supposed to have in your career, support that is established there for you in case you need that support. So I do see issues possibly coming up with that. But these issues, when they come up, they tend to also provide a resolution to the problem, especially if this is an ongoing issue. And I do know of a Leo client actually that has had this issue in the past, in terms of not having the support system that she should have at the office. And so these things come up to provide us with an opportunity to sit down and have a meeting and say, okay, I want to do my job, but you have to support me. That's your job. And I can't do my job without you doing yours, to come up with some sort of a solution to that problem. And honestly, that's why most problems come up, is because things just aren't working the way that they should be. They're not the well-oiled machine they should be. We don't deal with it. We put it off. We hope that things work out better. They don't work out better. And then we're forced to have the confrontation, and we're forced to have the conversation that will ultimately, hopefully, fix the problem. If not, then we're going to have another one of these situations, and you just have to keep having the conversation and trying to come up with the solution, until you actually find one. If only things were fixed easily in the world. Think of how much easier things would be, but it's just not the world we live in. I don't think it was ever the world we lived in. All these people talking about the good old days, I don't think that the good old days actually existed, to be honest with you. It's our perception of what those days were. That's what makes them good. But the reality is that people are people, and they're going to be flawed, and we have to deal with that. And part of that is taking responsibility for our own flaws, and part of that is learning to work with other people's flaws. So not so much fun. But then we get into Tuesday, where the moon is not present anymore, and you can breathe and things sort of calm down, and we don't have these crazy emotional responses about that anymore. The other interesting thing that is going on this week is we continue to have the Lilith, or dark moon, influencing Leo this week. And her influence is very much on the home and making changes in the home. And so I feel that what this is promoting is reorganization in the home. It's looking at how everything is set up and going, you know what, I'm just tired of this. I want to rearrange it, or I want to finally just get rid of that couch and get a new one. This is about starting to make those plans for the home, and coming up with a schedule for making those changes in the home that will promote more peace for you, but will also help to make things work like the well-oiled machine that you're looking for. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to Virgo. We are focused on our day-to-day schedule this week, although the moon coming into your sign Tuesday and Wednesday is going to create some challenges. Tuesday and Wednesday, the moon's focus is on those you love, moving into opposition with Neptune, which is very much focused on the inner closet. So some triggers, we're looking at some possible triggers there. And squared with Mars, which at this point is still retrograde. And Mars's focus is on the past. I feel like this revolves around dealing with either family members that already trigger you, so you've had issues with them in the past already, or you're dealing with people whose personalities mimic those family members and the trauma and the issues that you had to deal with there. The moon being a part of it, of course, is going to make this an emotional experience. So one thing that I can say about that first off, is that there's no way that you're going to go through life without being triggered. If you have trauma, and 98.5% of us do, if you have trauma, it's going to be triggered at some point. The smartest thing that you can do is to learn to identify first that you're being triggered. And the second thing is to be able to work through that trigger within the few seconds that this trigger is happening. Now, a trigger only happens for a few seconds. If we say that we've been triggered for a long amount of time, what actually happened is we were triggered for that few seconds, and now we're holding on to the feeling that the trigger gave us. We're not still being triggered. We're just holding on to the feeling that the trigger gave us. So when you go through a trigger moment, the first thing that I do is identify this is an old pain that's being triggered, and then I put it aside. Because if I'm having a business conversation, if I'm having a conversation that has nothing to do with the person who owned the original trigger, we definitely don't want that in the current conversation. So we'll avoid, or we'll identify that I'm being triggered, and I will put the trigger aside. And then if I'm smart, and I say if I'm smart because I don't always do it, if I'm smart, I pick up the trigger again later on that night when I'm alone, so that I can sit with it, so I can identify the root of that trauma, where that trauma is coming from, why do they feel the same, and then separate them. This is this thing, that is that thing. And that, therefore, I don't necessarily feel like I need to be triggered over and over again for that same situation, if that makes sense. This is also part of healing and sort of cleaning out that inner closet that we all wind up having at some point. So outside of the moon being in your sign, actually, let me bump into Thursday, because the moon is still there in Thursday, continuing to be in opposition with Jupiter and with Neptune, still on that secret closet, but the moon's focus is on your day-to-day schedule. Now, a Virgo who has somebody mess up their schedule, that's a scary thing to me. Virgos like to keep on track with what they're doing and not necessarily change plans a lot. And then there's some Virgos that just don't even make a plan. They just kind of sort of, jump from one thing to another. My son is one of those Virgos. The point is that if you do make plans, somebody else's BS gets in the way. It is very frustrating, and it may feel like you're just gonna snap, and that's really something that you have to try and make sure that that doesn't happen as much as possible. It's not going to help the situation. It'll probably make it worse. Then again, if it's a situation where you've wanted to snap but you didn't, because let's face it, of who it is and blah blah blah, and you just get pushed to that level, you may need to snap. I mean, you may just, this is your time to have your voice and to say what you need to say. And let's face it, we all don't have wonderful relationships with our family. So a lot of times family, we hold back. We don't say anything because, well, it's my mother, or well, it's my father, and I'm supposed to honor them, and blah blah blah. They push you to a limit where you can't take it anymore. It happens. We all get to that limit, and sometimes that's what's needed to promote change and to lay down some boundaries within those relationships as well. So that's really important. As we move out of that, and the sun moving out of there, we're just focused on our schedule, and we're right back to, let's organize everything to a place that is comfortable for me, so that I can function in my nice little control bubble, for lack of a better word. We all have one. Don't act like you don't have one. We all have one. So that's what I have for you guys this week. We're going to move on to Libra. We have the moon moving into Libra at the end of the week. But before we get there, there is no focus for this week. Actually, Libra is in between focuses, which really means that you get to focus your energy on whatever direction you would like to focus on, which is always nice. And that's going to go on all week, probably will end next week. So you might as well enjoy it while you can, or at least until the moon comes into your sign Friday and Saturday. We're going to end the week with the moon in Libra. Friday, the moon moves into a T-square with Jupiter, which is focused on the secret closet, that annoying place that we never want to think about. And Mercury's focus is on long-term goals and continues to be retrograde. I feel for you guys, a lot of this has to do with well, a couple of things. The word martyr always comes up around Libras, and I feel like, and the Libras that I've known in my lifetime, I feel like a lot of times they come up with their own plans of what they want to do, and then somebody else comes in with their plans, and of course the individual Libra's plans get kind of swept up underneath the carpet, and that's okay, we'll pick that up later, and then it never gets picked up. And I feel like, especially Libras that are continuing to do this with the same person over and over and over again, I feel like this is the boiling point. This is the point where the Libra is like standing up and saying, you know what, I'm sick and tired of putting my own stuff aside for you, kind of a thing. And you know what? Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes that's needed. You know, I think every Libra that I've ever known would feel really bad doing that. I know my husband would feel really bad doing that, but you know what? Sometimes that is what it takes to get your point across. And I also feel that a lot of times the sweeping your own stuff under the carpet is sort of, and it's, you know, you're using other people as an excuse to not pursue your own dream or your own plan, if that makes sense. If you don't pursue it, you never succeed or fail. And if you never succeed or fail, you don't know if it was going to work. And it's very easy to place that blame on another individual. We all do it. So I feel like this is part of that little makeup there in terms of the moon's T-square with Mercury and Jupiter. This is an old pattern, and it's an old pattern that's not getting you anywhere. And when it comes up, the best thing to do is to focus on how to fix this. And it's not just an easy fix like, well, I'll just stop sweeping my stuff under the carpet. You need to understand for yourself why you do that. Where does that come from? It's not just being a Libra, it's being raised with people who did that. It's being raised with people who expected you to do that. When you can identify where that comes from, you can detach from that because it's no longer there. It's no longer influencing your life anymore, but it will influence your life until you detach from it. As we move into Saturday, we're no longer in opposition with Jupiter, which is good. We do continue to have a square with the Sun and Pluto, both focused on career. So we're looking at possible issues within your day-to-day schedule of career. Maybe you have something and then a cancellation, something along those lines. The moon is also in a trine with Saturn and Venus on Saturday, so that kind of counterbalances your square a little bit. Saturn and Venus being focused on career and your support system. So even though there's a challenge with your career, you have support to get through that challenge. Challenges are not something that's necessarily there to hold you back. It's there to slow you down. It's there to promote learning. It's there to promote growth. It's there to test you to find out just how bad you want it and how much work you're willing to put into it. Most of the Libras that I know are willing to put a pretty good amount of work into it. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like I said earlier on in the videos, Mercury retrograde doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's usually delays and annoying things happen, but sometimes it promotes some really good things happening too. So you also want to be open to both sides, really, when you think about it. Outside of that, it looks like we will be moving to focus on your day-to-day schedule, and at least that's what the moon is promoting this week. But I feel like we're actually moving more towards focusing on getting your career goals set up, getting your daily schedule set up, making sure that you have everything that you need set up for success this year. And that's really what your main focus is this week, except for those couple of days where the moon comes in and screws everything up, but it always does. So that is what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Scorpio, no planets influencing Scorpio this week, not necessarily a bad thing. Focus is on relationships this week. I feel like this is an important time actually for you guys to sort of take stock of your relationships, if that makes sense. I feel like that's a thing that we all should be doing. I don't think we do it enough really. And not necessarily because we're looking at which ones we want to keep and which ones we want to get rid of. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. But a lot of times we have relationships that really need boundaries, and we just sort of put ourselves in this position to hope that maybe they'll get it one day. And I'm here to tell you that never happens. Okay. They'll never get it unless you explain it to them. Most people don't realize that they're doing something that might be offensive to you or might be bothering you, unless you tell them that it is bothering you and you would prefer that they don't do it anymore, or come up with a solution that works for both of you, actually. I feel like this week is an opportunity to really pay attention, and you may have a couple of those relationships just sort of pop up on you. We all have those friends that think that they have an open door policy to our house, first of all. But they just sort of show up as and when they want to show up. And so it's important. I mean, if that's something that bothers you because they're showing up at inopportune times, or you have plans and then your plans are changed because this person showed up, this is an opportunity to have a talk with them and let them know you need to call before you just show up, or let's, schedule some time so that, I have time for my spouse and my kids and everybody else that wants my time, kind of a thing. So it really seems like a very good week for that. And I feel like that's really a lot of your focus this week, is just making sure that you have healthy boundaries on your relationships. Every relationship needs healthy boundaries, even, right down to the closest relationships, your relationships with your children, your relationships with your spouse. Just because they are those people doesn't mean that they can run all over you or treat you the way that they are treating you that you don't like, or what have you. It doesn't give them an excuse. We are responsible for training people to treat us the way we want to be treated. We cannot sit by and silently and hope that they figure it out. That is no longer going to work. We have to take control of the situation in some way, shape, or form. And just because you introduce boundaries doesn't mean that the problem just automatically vanishes. I mean, we can only hope, but that is not the case. A lot of people need time and reminders of the boundaries. So you're basically retraining, and retraining does take some time. So make sure that you are aware that this is going to be an ongoing thing, and also you're aware that they are going to try and get around those boundaries over and over and over again, and you just have to keep on task and keep reminding them, and try not to change them around too much unless you really need to change them. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Sagittarius, focus is on finances this week with no planetary influences at all. It is just what it is, and focus on finances. In all honesty, this is a good time of year for it to come up with your financial goals, of course, in terms of what you want your money to do. And that is the thing. If you don't come up with financial goals, your money just does what it always does, and nothing ever changes. And we kind of need growth and change. That's part of our evolution. We can't really stay the same forever. And let's face it, when the situation isn't ideal, we don't want to stay in that situation. We want it to change and evolve. So this week, this month, at the beginning of the year, is a prime time to be creating those goals and to really look at where you want to be at the end of the year and set up the things that you need to do in order to make sure that you're there. For me, in my business, I spent many years just sort of willy-nilly getting whatever I get and not really paying attention to how much money that makes. And the truth is that I got stuck making the same amount for a really long time because I didn't really have any sort of control over it. By understanding that I need to do so many appointments a week and, I have to have so many memberships and all of that, it helps me to build up to the amount of money that I would like to make. It gives me some control over it instead of being the victim of everybody else and whether or not they're going to come to me and give me money. That's a horrible way to live. Nobody wants to live that way. So coming up with a plan really does help with that because you know what you need to do every single month and you just need to get that done. A little bit more is good, a little bit less is not so great, but you make it up, in the next month. You don't want to keep doing that because then you're going to wind up owing yourself a lot at the end of the year. So try not to do that too much, but it helps you to stay on track with your financial goals. And that's really what it's all about because you're never going to get to the financial position that you want to be in without doing that. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Capricorn, we continue to have that lovely Mercury retrograde in Capricorn all week long. So happy about that. The sun continues to be in Capricorn. This is really the last full week, actually, that the sun will be in Capricorn. I do believe it moves on next week. This is the weekend, the 14th. So yes, it moves on next week. So we won't be dealing with that. Still have Pluto in Capricorn this week as well. In a couple of months, because yes, that's how long it takes. In a couple of months, Pluto is going to move into Aquarius. But like I have been talking about before, it is sort of going to bounce back and forth a little bit before it officially moves out in a few years. So at least starting this year, you guys get breaks. I have had Pluto in Capricorn for as long as I've been doing horoscopes. It's going to be really weird actually to have Pluto in a different sign influencing a different sign. Even weirder because it's mine, but still it's sort of exciting because Pluto takes so long to move through a sign. It just gets heavy after a while, and it'll be nice to lighten that just a little bit. All of these planets are interacting with all of the other planets a lot. We'll just put that out there. Mercury square with Jupiter. Mercury is focused on long-term goals. Jupiter is focused on that secret closet, our trauma place, basically, or our trauma closet, we'll call that. And with Mercury being retrograde, this really is all about having a hard time committing to any long-term goals because you've had issues in the past, and that trauma really is driving the bus. And the question that you want to ask yourself is, do you want the trauma driving the bus? Is it worth it to you? Are you going to be able to succeed while the trauma is driving the bus? And the answer is no, you're not. The trauma is always going to win. So this week really is about taking a look at that and deciding whether you want to continue to let that trauma drive the bus, or if you want to take the keys and take over driving that bus. That will give you a little bit more control. The sun and Pluto are focused on career, both planets in a sextile with Jupiter and Neptune. Both of those planets are still focused on inner trauma, but this is a helpful aspect. The planets are actually working together for a positive result. And you wouldn't think that your trauma responses are positive, but it actually helps you to use those to your advantage. It seems kind of weird, but a great example of that is I look at my past trauma as something that is helpful to me now because I can connect with other people who have had similar traumas. And by being able to connect with those people, I can help them through their trauma because I've gone through my own trauma healing myself. And so therefore, by doing that myself, it is a lot easier for me to help somebody else go through that. In some ways, your trauma does work in your favor. It teaches you different things. And as an adult, and I think that most Capricorns would really understand this more than anybody. As an adult, looking at other adults that had wonderful childhoods where people loved them and they had both their parents and there was nobody abusive in the house. They also don't understand the dark side of the world because of that, at least in most examples. They don't understand the darker side of the world. And I feel like living with trauma as a child does help you understand that. And while we don't want to focus on the dark side of the world, we definitely want to be prepared for the dark side of the world. And Capricorns, your little bit of a pessimistic nature helps with that as well. So in some cases, it is helpful. And it's specifically helpful when you're understanding another person. And that understanding and empathy can help boost you forward in your career, or at least help you to be able to submit the right career goals. So lots of stuff going on. We'll say lots of stuff going on, but not a lot of bad stuff. And I think that that's really the big thing. Do want to talk a little bit about Mercury being in a trine with Uranus, and which turns into a grand trine on Wednesday when the moon moves into Virgo. This is actually a very powerful day for you guys with all of these planets working together. The moon's focus is on those you love, and Uranus's focus is on self. This is not something that Capricorns are really all that great with. Self-care is not a strong suit for Capricorns. Capricorns really are good at taking care of everybody else and putting themselves on the back burner. This planet makeup is coming to you to say, treat yourself in the same way that you would treat everybody else. Care for yourself in the same way that you would care for everybody else. Again, waiting for other people to do what you do is not going to work. It never does. You want to treat yourself the way that you treat other people or everybody else, or take care of yourself the same way that you would take care of everybody else. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And I am moving on to Aquarius. We have Venus in Aquarius officially moving into a square with Uranus. We just got rid of that Saturn and Uranus square last week. And then Venus comes in and takes up the cross. Just call it that, the cross. Good news is Venus moves pretty quickly. So this should be broken up by the end of next week, beginning of the week after that. So at least we don't have to deal with it for very long. Venus is square with Uranus. Venus is focused on career. Uranus is focused on self. This is actually kind of interesting. For most people, I would say for most people, what this means is don't put so much into your career that you're ignoring yourself. For most Aquarians, I think that has to be reversed, actually. It's not don't spend so much time on yourself that you're ignoring your career. That's part of it. But Aquarians are not, I wouldn't say they're not good at self-care. They're really good at putting themselves first, at least I am anyways. And most of the Aquarians that I know are generally pretty good at putting themselves first before other people. But it's the quality of what you're putting into yourself that is questionable. Self-care is many things. It's not wasting time necessarily. Now, don't get me wrong. I schedule a day every single week to waste time. That is part of my self-care regime. And I do feel that the reason why that works for me is because I'm turning off the people machine. The humanitarian is hiding and hermiting herself. so that she can recharge her batteries. So I'm really not wasting time. I'm wasting time doing things that don't take a lot of energy so that I can replace my batteries or replenish my batteries. Outside of that, being an Aquarius, I spend a lot of time procrastinating and not doing things that I should be doing and wasting my time on things that I really have no business doing in that moment. You know, it's okay in some cases, but not okay when you're supposed to be doing something else. So I feel like part of that stems from boredom, part of that stems from things being done the same way over and over again, which is where Venus is really a helpful hand, because her creative influences, let's face it, Aquarians are not creative people. We need that little bit of creative boost, and that's what Venus is coming in to give us right before it's our time, because that starts next week. So we'll have the sun moving into Aquarius, and guess what? Moving into a square with Uranus right after Venus does. So we're going to continue to have this problem. But the bottom line about self-care is quality over quantity. That's what that comes down to. Saturn's focus is on your support system and isn't really interacting with any other planets right now, which is good. What I can say about that is, with Saturn being all about responsibility, a quality support system really is your responsibility. I mean, we don't get necessarily stuck with our support system. We choose our support system. And again, it goes back to, do we have the right support system? And if we don't, we might need to rebuild it. If we do have the right support system and we're not asking for help, we need to knock our shit off and we need to start asking for help. I was reminded on Christmas Day by two people in my house when I was running around stressing myself the F out. What do you need help with? Just ask and I will help you. And it wasn't that I really needed help. And to be honest with you, there was no reason for me to be stressing the F out either. But it was a nice way for them to remind me that if I want help, all I need to do is ask for it. And running around yelling and screaming and getting stressed out because nobody had offered yet is not the solution, obviously. So I fixed my stuff and moved on. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And finally, Pisces focus is on our trauma closet. That's its new name. That's what I'm going to call it. Focus is on that trauma closet, and we continue to have Neptune in Pisces as well. This year, I do believe that Neptune will continue to be in Pisces throughout this year as well. Don't know if I've looked at that or not. I guess I should. We also have Vespa in Pisces. Vespa is a secondary planet. It's not something that has a very heavy influence, but it is known as the eternal flame that burns on the hearth, which represents home and what feels like home to us. When you're focused on trauma, or when you are having trauma responses coming up more than they usually do, that puts you in a very uncomfortable place. And when you are in an uncomfortable place, you never really can find that comfort. To me, I have to be at home on my couch in my little corner of that couch. That's my comfortable place. That's where I feel safe. I feel I can recharge. I feel like no matter what comes through that door, I can handle it, deflect it, and move on. When I'm milling about in public, it doesn't feel the same way. Even if I ground and bubble, which is a good comfort for me, I'm still exposed to the element, so to speak. So I feel like two things are coming up with this for you guys. The first thing is that there are times where we interact with people who have had similar trauma responses or similar trauma experiences, I should say. And when we interact with people who have similar traumatic experiences, it is going to trigger us. And that trigger, if you're being triggered while you're trying to help somebody, that is not helpful to that person. So you have to be able to work through that trigger until later. The other thing I feel is that there may be some situations coming up for you guys this week, specifically around the middle of the week when the moon moves into opposition with Neptune, where you feel like you are just completely and totally out of your comfort zone and everything inside of you is screaming to get back into it, but you just can't. It's not possible right now for whatever reason. And so you're going to have to find a way to sort of work through that to be able to function and focus on what needs to get done. And that's really going to come up around that moon opposition right in the middle of the week. And because also because the moon is a part of this, it is definitely going to create emotional responses. So this is really going to be your stressful day of the week, more so I feel than any other day. Of course, you also want to take into consideration we are in a Mercury retrograde. Miscommunications are going to happen, delays are going to happen, all the normal Mercury retrograde baloney is going to happen, which is frustrating and annoying, and nobody wants to deal with it, but we don't really have a choice. It is what it is, you know. If we all lived in a perfect world, I wouldn't have to do horoscopes, you know, and things would just be easier. Unfortunately, as human beings, I think as individuals we may say we like easy, but I think as a whole we don't, which is why we tend to complicate things. And really on an individual scale, it's all about managing how you complicate things because you have no control over how the rest of the world complicates it. So the more you can manage the way you complicate things, the easier it is to get through how the world complicates things, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And that is what I have for everybody. Thanks for coming and hanging out and enjoying the horoscopes again. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Make it a great week, everybody.